What will oil do for Guyana? The answer is that oil will make Guyana poorer, not richer. You've been told that Guyana will get 50% of profit and 2% royalty on vast amounts of oil. Minister Trotman promises people vast wealth and cooking gas in every house. Leaving aside the cooking gas for now, the 2016 petroleum agreement makes it clear that Guyana will not get a share of vast profits, and the actual royalty is less than 2%. Did this government read and understand the petroleum agreement before signing it? First, Guyana has to pay the costs of oil exploration and production by Esso, Hess and Nexen over 600 blocks, amounting to 26,806 square kilometers of Guyana's exclusive economic zone. Those costs will run into billions of American dollars. Second, environmental damage. Oil exploration and production cause environmental damage. That damage has a cost. That cost does not appear anywhere in the calculation of the oil deal. Each subsequent phase of oil production will cause more environmental damage. That damage has a cumulative cost. Third, environmental risk. There is a risk of oil spills, well blowouts, tanker collisions, and so on. That risk increases with every well that is drilled, with every tanker that enters Guyana's waters. The mere existence of that risk has financial implications, even if nothing happens. The government has ignored the risk and has not put a cost on it. They have allowed Esso, Hess, and Nexen to get away without taking out any insurance. Fourth, if there is an oil spill or a well blowout, it could destroy forever Guyana's marine environment. It could result in potentially limitless liability for Guyana, and of course it could wipe out any revenue that Guyana might happen to get for this oil. I will examine each one of these in turn. First, the revenue. There is no revenue from the sale of the oil. Guyana gets paid in oil. What will Guyana do with crude oil? Guyana has no tankers and no refinery, and the government clearly has no idea how to sell oil. The contract says that the minister can ask Esso, Hess and Nexen to use their reasonable efforts to market Guyana's share of the oil, but Guyana has to pay them to do so. Guyana currently owns all of the oil in the reserves. How much oil Guyana gets depends on a few things. How much oil is actually in the reserves, how much oil is extracted from the reserves, how much oil Esso, Hess and Nexen take for free, how much oil is sold and at what price, and how much costs and expenses Esso, Hess and Nexen claim. How much money Guyana then gets for what's left with its oil, minus the expenses associated with selling that oil. The government has no answers to these questions. The economists, the accountants, and the financial analysts don't know the answers either. All those tables and projections are guesswork. Some of it, good guesswork, but it is still guesswork. How much oil do we have in our reserves? The Minister of Finance told a mining conference in Canada that Guyana has 3.7 billion barrels of oil. He got that figure from Esso. In 2016, the Securities Exchange Commission in the United States told ExxonMobil that under the accounting rules imposed by the SEC, ExxonMobil could no longer claim in its reserves 3.6 billion barrels of oil equivalent from its Kearl tar sands field. By a happy coincidence, ExxonMobil has announced 3.7 billion barrels of oil in Guyana. Has that figure been independently verified? No. Without independent verification, the minister literally does not know what he is talking about. He may believe what he is told, he may want to believe it, but he doesn't know. For now, the amount of oil in our reserves is whatever Esso announces it to be. How much of our oil will be extracted? Under the contract, Esso, Hess and Nexen will inform the minister how much oil is extracted. Guyana cannot verify that number. All the Minister of Natural Resources will be able to do is observe the operations as long as he gives 7 days' notice. He cannot check or verify. Strictly speaking, oil production is whatever Esso, Hess and Nexen say that it is. I turn now to free oil, because the oil production figure is not a very helpful figure. Esso, Hess and Nexen can take as much production as they need for any petroleum operations within the contract area and also within the transportation and terminal system. Again, Guyana does not have the capacity to check or the legal right to verify how much oil Esso, Hess and Nexen take. Strictly speaking, the amount of oil that Esso, Hess and Nexen reasonably require is whatever they say it is. Bear in mind they don't have to pay for it. This is free oil. If you deduct the free oil from the production oil, you get cost oil, which is then sold on the market. Esso, Hess and Nexen set the price. The price is not entirely arbitrary, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same as the price quoted in the oil markets. At the end of each month, there will be revenue from the sale of cost oil. Now, don't imagine that Guyana is getting 50% of this. You have to take off the costs to get the profit. Now, the costs provision is what makes it absolutely clear that Guyana is at a serious financial disadvantage. There are basically two phases of costs: pre-contract costs and everything else. From 1999 to December 2015, the pre-contract costs are stated to be $460 million US. Minister Trotman has agreed that Guyana will pay $460 million US. There's a second lot of pre-contract costs from January 2016 to the 7th of October 2016, the date when the petroleum prospecting production license was granted. The costs for the whole of 2016 were about $583 million. If you apportion it to October, you get roughly $400 million. Again, Minister Trotman has agreed that Guyana will pay this. So as at the 7th of October 2016, the government's attempts to sell Guyana's oil has cost Guyana $900 million US. I have not been able to find any law which clearly gives the minister the authority to burden the people of Guyana with a bill of nearly $900 million US. So it's quite possible that he acted illegally. I turn now to the contract costs. From the 8th of October 2016 onwards, Guyana pays the oil companies recoverable contract costs. And this appears to be every cost that the oil companies say they incur. Exploration and development costs include the cost of every well that is drilled, whether successful or not. These wells are expensive. In June 2017, Esso announced that the expenditure for the Liza field alone would be $4.4 billion US. Each oil field will be very expensive. And just to give you an example, Guyana pays for pipelines, wellheads, equipment, offshore platforms, terminals, piers, direct and indirect services, including vehicles, aircraft, power plants, housing, furniture, community and recreational facilities. Guyana pays the legal costs incurred by Esso, Hess and Nexen, even the costs of their in-house legal advisors. Guyana pays for expatriate employees to travel to Guyana and rent houses. Guyana pays labor costs, including any bonuses that the management decide to pay themselves. Have a look at Annex C and Annex D of the agreement, because there are pages and pages and pages of costs that can be deducted. You may think, though, well, the costs are limited to Guyana. Not so. Guyana pays for employees outside of Guyana. You may think, well, it's limited to Esso, Hess and Nexen. Not so. It includes costs of employees of companies that are affiliated. Guyana pays for every poor business decision. Guyana pays for every extravagant business decision. Having racked up huge costs, Esso, Hess and Nexen can deduct 75% of their costs from the cost oil. Guyana gets 50% of what is left. But there's a catch. If in any month the costs exceed the revenue, then the costs are carried over to the next month and so on. So in fact, there may not be much profit oil because of these continuing costs. Let's just do a really simple example. If the costs this month are $100 million US, Esso Hess and Nexen can deduct 75 million. But suppose the revenue was only 50 million. The 25 million is carried over. This is likely to happen because there is no ring fencing. If Esso, Hess and Nexen spend money on a field that is dry, they simply pass the cost on to Guyana. They don't lose out. Now, Guyana already has to pay nearly $900 million US in pre-contract costs to October 2016, and all of the costs from October 2016 to the day that production actually starts. As soon as Guyana gets profit oil, which might be very little, Guyana has to hand it back to pay off the debt that the government is racking up now. Or the government could sell the oil, take the money and spend it, and leave future generations to pay off the debt. ExxonMobil is boasting to its shareholders that production costs in Guyana are low. Perhaps they should have said that production costs in Guyana are less than a quarter of normal costs because they get back 75% of whatever costs they say they incurred. They get as much free oil as they say they need, and they don't pay any taxes. But now you must be thinking, we still have the 2% royalty, which the government is telling us we will get on the oil produced. Wrong. Take the oil that is produced, deduct from it all the oil that is used for fuel or transportation in the petroleum operations from all production licenses, and then Guyana gets 2% of whatever oil is left. So a more accurate description of the royalty is that it is 2% of an unknown figure made up of an oil price set by Esso, Hess and Nexen minus what Esso, Hess and Nexen say they use for fuel transportation. And Guyana can get that in cash. Or the contract says that the minister can give it back to Esso, Hess and Nexen. Nothing is impossible in this deal. I turn now to the environmental cost. In Liza Phase 1 alone, Esso will dump 4,000 barrels of treated sewage every day into Guyana's ocean, amounting to 1,411,368,000 gallons of sewage. Esso's environmental impact assessment says that this treated sewage will benefit marine mammals. In other words, endangered and rare whales and dolphins will be better off because Esso is pouring sewage into the water that they live in. Liza Phase 1 will also dump chemicals into the ocean and produce radioactive waste. It will emit 980 kilotons of greenhouse gases every year, amounting to at least 19,600 kilotons over the proposed 20 years of the Liza well. Carbon emissions contribute to climate change. This is the best-case scenario. This damage needs to be quantified and deducted from any income that Guyana actually gets. What happens if things go wrong? There are two big risks: an oil spill from a tanker or a well blowout, either of which dumps oil into the ocean. The environmental impact assessment uses a spill scenario of 20,000 barrels of oil per day for 30 days, 60,000 barrels of oil, 25,200,000 gallons of oil. The environmental impact assessment says that the duration of acute impacts would not be long and that the impacts are reversible. Let's have a look. In 1989, the Exxon Valdez tanker spilled 11 million gallons of oil in the Prince William Sound in Alaska, about half of what is being considered in the EIA for Guyana. That oil covered 11,000 square miles, killed hundreds of thousands of birds and animals. More than 25 years later, Prince William Sound has not recovered. Exxon apparently spent $2.5 billion trying to clean up the spill and agreed to pay another $900 million for the cleanup cost of the American government. The Guyana spill scenario is more than double Exxon Valdez. How much will it cost to clean up such a spill at today's cost? And who will bear those costs? What about a well blowout? The BP Macondo well blowout spilled 4,900,000 barrels of oil and killed 11 people and over 1 million birds and animals. BP's cost is said to be in the region of about $62 billion US. With every new well drilled in Guyana, the risk increases. If there is a well blowout, who do you think will get the bill? The environmental impact assessment done by ESSO says that the oil is unlikely to reach Guyana's shores. Don't relax. The wind will take it north and west. That means, what's north and west of here? It will go to the Caribbean islands. That means Guyana will be liable under international law for transboundary pollution. International law says states must ensure that activities in their jurisdiction do not cause harm to the environments of other states. So Guyana will have transboundary liability. In short, where is the evidence that Guyana will make money from this deal? Thank you.